We don't appear to have any members of the public either in the chamber or online. So I'm going to save us a few minutes if everybody's happy with that, and not read out all the housekeeping stuff for the members of the public. Everybody happy with that? Lovely. Okay, that's a minute and a half saved then. Councillor Bennett will join us on Teams, and I think she's already done that. And so we're good to go. Do we have any apologies other than the ones I've got here? I've got from Councillor Davey and independent person Rob Bennett are the only two apologies I have. Any more? Oh yes, we have a couple of switches. Yes, yeah, we do have two of those. So Rose is here and Tim's here instead. That's all I have really. Item 2, of course, if you have any declarations of interest to make, you may make them now, as I'm sure you all know, and if they occur to you later on in the meeting, that's absolutely fine, just to make those interests clear now. Councillor Moore.
I never know with these things that sort of overlap with council work, but the item 6, amendment to contract procedure rules, I have applied for those grants for my community group. So
That's fine, Rosie, because it's really, that's not a prejudicial interest, so I'm happy with that. Thank you for that anyway. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. Everybody happy with those? Any questions? Anything anybody wants to say on those minutes? Going once, going twice? Everybody happy? Lovely. In that case, then I will sign those in a very few moments. Thank you very much. We have no public questions, as just previously disclosed. So no public in the meeting, nobody online, and no forward public questions. Just for the sake of it, I'll let you know that because of the unexpected public holiday on Monday, we gave the public extra time. In fact, we set up to midday yesterday, so the public did have plenty of time to actually put in questions should they so wish. Right, okay, that takes us to item 5. I'll just shuffle my papers here. I believe Jonathan's online and ready to go. Jonathan, it's all yours. If you would like to introduce this item, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, and good evening, everyone. So I'm introducing our internal audit progress update report, which is our regular sort of update to the committee that we do around this time of year. Just by way of very brief introduction, turning to your packs, I'm just going to pick out some of the key points. We're starting on page 7 of the packs. The purpose of this report is just to really provide you all with an update of any work that we've completed since May. Also provide an indication of the forward plan of work we've got coming up over the next 6 months, and an opportunity for me to communicate my opinion on the overall control environment. So I'm just, in terms of recommendations, I'm asking you to note the content of the report. So diving into the report itself, which starts on page 10, the things that I would probably draw to your attention, probably starting on sort of like page 11 when we look at the resources and team updates. I think we've still been have a lot of focus on corporate projects. We've still been doing business grants works. We're doing certification now, providing assurance back to central governments. We've also been getting involved in providing assurance for other corporate schemes, things like Ukraine and the cost of living, plus the transformation programme. But that said, we've still been making reasonable progress with our audits, and we've got those listed later on. So I'm happy that we'll still be able to provide an assurance opinion to the committee. The plan has changed slightly to what we reported earlier in the year in July, and that's because we've had 4 mandatory sort of grant certifications from central government. So we didn't really know what they were at the time that we presented that report, and so they've come in after that. So we've just adjusted our plan to do that. It's not going to have a big material impact upon our delivery of the existing items. On page 14, we've got our finalised review that we've completed since the last report. So there are 5 there. A grant assurance scheme. We've done a review on the financial management code, and that was an important piece of work because it's a new requirement to report this in the annual governance statement. So it's really good for internal audits to actually provide that assurance for the first time that we have to do that. And I'm pleased to say that that's come up with full assurance, so that's positive there. Recognise counter fraud work that we've been doing. And actually, I should also mention that we've got legal services where we completed a follow-up review. And they've actually implemented all their actions that we set them in the previous report. So we can see a positive improvement from limited assurance rating to now full assurance rating. Looking forwards on page 17 of the report, this is our sort of work in progress and forward plan. And you can probably see we've got a few reviews in progress at the moment, some which are coming close towards conclusion and some which we're yet to start. Another big thing that we've got is on page 20, the National Fraud Initiative. So once every 2 years, we complete a rather large data extract from all of our systems. So we've been preparing for that at the moment. We're expecting to upload data sets from early October. This is to provide data to the Cabinet Office. And all councils do this and the data gets matched. And it helps us to prevent sort of fraud and error by looking at what could be done better and improve our control processes. And if there are any cases which require investigation, that gives us an opportunity to try and recover any funds. So really, I would then just come to, I suppose, the end of the report, the conclusion on page 21. We're still sort of complying with the public sector internal audit standards, which is important. We're making sure that our processes are reviewed for continuous improvements. And we're still delivering a risk-based plan. And I'm happy that we're going to be able to provide assurance reports at the end of all this work. That's probably all I was going to say. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Any questions, comments? Sam?
Thank you so much for that. Just on page 16 of the overall document, I'm not sure that there's an actual page number for the report. Looking at the corporate complaints and feedback, I'm just wondering if you could let us know why that's sort of at a reasonable level rather than full, and if there's anything we can do to address that.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, the reason we looked at this, because it was reasonable assurance before, which I should say is actually quite good. Sometimes if things are full assurance, you'd question whether you've got disproportionate controls in place. It is complex, and the reason that we looked at this time is because there'd been a sort of change in sort of processes. So actually, it's quite a good positive achievement that with those changes, they've maintained a reasonable level of assurance. We did have some minor level actions to make improvements, which we agreed with the team. And I think once they're implemented, that is something where we can possibly take up to full assurance. But they're just not there at the moment.
Any other questions for Jonathan? Going once, going twice? Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. The recommendations are... Okay, Councillor Bennett. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Apologies, Chair. I know it's very difficult when working in hybrid. I just have some very straightforward questions for Jonathan. But before I start, I just want to thank him for giving us such a clear and comprehensive report. And how pleasant a change it is to have something of this quality compared to what I have to put up with in my day job. Could I just ask, how much of your team's time has to be spent on the compulsory work, such as the grant audits, and how much is free to spend on whatever you agree with the council?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't actually have the actual numbers up in front of me, but we have a big calculation behind the scenes where we do look at our resources each year. In terms of a percentage split, I would say ordinarily in a normal year, it's probably 70%, 30%, 70% sort of risk-based, 30% the mandatory things, which we sort of classify under the core controls. It's probably increased to about 60, 40%, so 40% core activities at the moment. And that's because there's been a lot of sort of grant activity over the last couple of years, which we've been involved in helping provide real-time assurance on the controls, but now at the end of it, providing assurance back to central government that the controls were effective. So that saves them having to come in and do the audit. So it's a more efficient way of working. If things return back to normal, and it's difficult to say that at the moment because there are lots of other external pressures going on in the world, of course, I would expect it to probably return to about a 70%, 30% split.
Okay, and I know this is a bit of a tricky question ahead of the big announcement on Friday, but do you think the amount of mandatory work is likely to stay the same or go up?
It's really, really difficult to say. I wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't like to commit myself because I'll probably get it wrong one way or the other. Yeah, I think probably what we've been seeing this year is, in terms of an increase in core activity work, is where we've delivered a lot of grant schemes on behalf of central government. I'm alert that we may have more to do in the future, but it seems to be that a lot of things are being dealt with centrally. So possibly not.
Okay, reason I was asking that was just in terms of whether there might be an opportunity to take on an additional area of work. Because I noticed that you are a modern full service internal audit group. And so, for example, you're not just considering whether procedures are safe, but also whether, they're possibly a bit too clunky and a bit too overdone. And I just wonder if there's any scope to look at the evidential support for bandings on the housing register. Because although I only see a very limited number of the issues, from my perspective, it seems to take a very long time. It's very dependent on input from third parties who may not see cooperating with us as a priority. And it does sort of quite often expose us to secondary problems because it delays us getting people's banding and getting them to start their relocation journey. So if there is an opportunity to maybe look at that in future, it doesn't have to be this year even, I would very much welcome that. Thank you, that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Naomi. Caroline?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question here from the independent person. Okay. And it is, can Jonathan say whether this year's work is broadly in line with the plan at this stage, or is there any slippage that members need to be aware of?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we're still broadly in line with the original plan because we did anticipate that some of our time was going to be spent on grant activities. But as I mentioned earlier on, we did have these 4 extra sort of pieces of work which came in unplanned. So our approach is to talk through and provide some sort of assurance in the area. We have a sort of what we class as sort of like an audit universe where we sort of like plot all the potential things that we could review. So the previous example is there as well about sort of like banding, that could fit within that universe. And what we do is we continuously reassess all those potential reviews, and that's what we bring forward into our 6-month plan. So we try and keep it quite dynamic. There are, of course, some core activities which we have to do, and which I mentioned earlier, and they do have strict deadlines because we're often providing assurance for other people. And so it has to be done to strict deadlines because they then have to collect all that evidence themselves. So we're still very much on target for delivering all those core bits of work. The other ones, the risk-based bits of work, those are the ones which can be more flexible and more agile. And it should be because new things will come in which we've not planned for. So I don't have any real concerns about those risk bits of work at the moment, but it's something obviously I'd be quite alert to. We do have some sort of activities which I would class as not within our current plan, but below the line that we would look at in the following sort of 6 months. And those are the ones which are sort of like subject to change and review according to the changing risk environment. So I suppose basically to sum that up, no, I'm okay. We're still broadly in line with our original plan.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that concludes any responses to your report, except I echo Councillor Bennett's comments, of course. Great report. Thank you very much for that. And you can consider it duly noted. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That takes us to item 6 on page 25. And you will find recommendations on page 26, just over on 2.1. Julie, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you very much, Chair. The grants team is seeking an amendment to the contract procedure rules to enable grant agreements to be signed underhand where appropriate, rather than executing them exclusively as deeds. This is currently happening in practice. My understanding is that it became particularly appropriate as COVID hit. We had to be much more flexible in our approach to dealing with community and voluntary groups. The team has always adopted a risk management approach in terms of the way it makes funding awards, and nothing's changed there, but we're really seeking to embed this approach within the council's procedure rules, because it's much more accessible to voluntary and community groups and seems more proportionate with the vast amount of the majority of the awards that the grants team makes. So the recommendation is that the committee is asked to recommend to council that the contract procedure rules are amended to enable grant agreements to be approved by deed or signed underhand where appropriate by delegated authority to the director. So the new wording would be that all grant agreements paid to third parties must be executed as a deed or signed underhand where appropriate by delegated authority to the director. I hope the report was quite straightforward, so I'm happy to leave my summary there, but would welcome any questions or comments or feedback from committee. Thank you.
Sam? And then Katie.
Thank you. There's a trend here. We're getting great reports. I love this committee. Just on the new proposed wording, I was just wondering, and this is more of a question than a suggestion, but is it worth clarifying exactly what appropriate might entail within the wording? Or is it okay for us not to do that? Because it seems a little bit vague. I don't know if that's intentional and useful, but just thought I'd raise it.
Thank you for that. I did have a discussion around that, and I think the feeling was that the circumstances could really vary. It could be, for example, that we felt it's appropriate because of the value of an award, but conversely, it could be that perhaps it was a new group and we wanted to develop a relationship over a couple of years before we felt comfortable to move away from a deed. So I suppose it would be difficult. We could give examples, but I don't think we could really kind of tie it down any more than that. So the advice was to keep it a bit vague where appropriate, but I'm happy to take further thoughts or feedback on that.
I've got a query and then just a comment. So just for clarification, when you say this is recommended to, we're being asked to recommend to council, is that the full council meeting, that the next one that's coming up, or yeah, is that the way
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's just, I think this is a really good report because it reminds us how much we can actually put into grant funding in the city, and the examples that are covered in the background are just amazing, that even with these difficult times we're managing to keep these grants in place for the people who need them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Big.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions, which I'll preface with the view that I strongly support the idea of introducing greater simplicity and the ease of access to our grant propositions. But I wonder if someone could comment on how it's been possible for us to have contract procedure rules which have clearly not been observed over the past. I mean, you mentioned COVID, but it doesn't actually say that. And just wondering, what is the significance of the contract procedure rules if we've already sort of swerved and done what sort of seemed to us practical at the time. It's maybe a little bit concerning, although probably good, that we're trying to arrive at a situation where we have rules which we feel are practical and sensible to comply with. The other point I wanted to make was the actual proposal, and it follows up a little bit the point that has just been made. I wonder whether the actual proposal would be better if it was combined with a financial threshold above which it always had to be a deed. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with the proposition there, but I'm saying that in addition to that, maybe it would be appropriate that the grants above a certain level were always supported by a deed, recognising that it's the smaller value and the smaller organisations that find that process the most cumbersome. And it, I'm sure, would reduce the number of deeds we'd have to produce by a long way as well. I don't know what such a financial threshold would be, but I just wonder whether that would be a sensible thing rather than to make this entirely discretionary. And that really links with my final point, which is that, I mean, I have had responsibility for overseeing this grant programme in the past, and I well understand what is meant by statements in here that the best certainty or the best confidence is achieved through getting to know the clients, getting to know the grant applicants really well. And I mean, it can't be ignored that that is the case, but I just worry a little bit about us leaning too much on a relationship basis for this, because completely legitimate and quite compelling new needs will come along, new applicants will come along, and one wouldn't want there to be some sense of a sort of magic circle where the people administering the grants and the people applying for most grants all knew each other terribly well, had a lot of confidence in each other, and someone new came along, and that was quite a difficult hurdle to cross for people, and just worried about the possible impression of it being a bit discriminatory in that way, and it could be partly addressed if there was a financial threshold, but I'd just be interested in your comments about that point. Thanks.
Perhaps if it's okay, I could take the last question first, around the relationship basis and whether there is a danger that might make the grants team perhaps not scrutinise an application quite as thoroughly as they might do a new group. Really what I would say is that we really do have a strict set of criteria, and we follow, we have a set of paperwork and we follow that, and only the strongest applications will be approved, whether or not we've got an existing relationship with those groups. And I think the pressure on the budget last year certainly was the greatest it's been within the living memory of the grants officers. So, you know, we really have had to be really strict with that. And I think phase 2 of the grants review, which is imminent, is really going to need to focus on that and acknowledge that we do actually need to build on our relationships, because that's how we get the early warning signals. And sometimes actually we get them from other groups. They give us a little bit of a heads up that that, you know, there may be issues we need to look at with another group, because we've got that relationship with them and they feel they're able to say that in a discreet way. But ultimately we really must have a strong set of criteria and a set of a way of approaching things through risk, rather than based on any relationships that we might have, whether that's officers or elected members. So absolutely take on board that point. In terms of financial threshold, that is something we considered and we looked at. But as you'll know, and it's in the public domain, several of our grants are quite substantial awards. For example, the Citizens Advice Bureau, we make awards of over £300,000, and latterly we haven't made that grant agreement as a deed. So I think there was really a feeling that if we weren't going to do it with the Citizens Advice Bureau, who would we do it in terms of the value of the deed? But I would say again, this is potentially within the scope of phase 2 of the grants review. If, for example, we were able to move to longer term funding agreements, whatever they may look like, certainly we'd need to be looking at a value threshold, because we'd be committing significant amounts of council funding. So I don't think it's ruled out, and I think that's perhaps something that the director will want to consider as part of this, as part of their delegation, really, as to whether they wish to set a threshold, or whether they want to look at each one on a case-by-case basis. And in terms of your first point, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, being relatively new myself. I've only been in post a year, but I am aware that certainly other local authorities don't have contract procedure rules within their constitution. I think there's a bit of a mix across the country, and I think that perhaps by not having that level of detail within the constitution would enable us to have these kind of conversations sort of a bit more offline, so we wouldn't have to come to committee now to make such a recommendation. But I don't know, perhaps whether Gary or somebody more appropriate might have something they'd like to say about that first point.
Okay, thanks for that, Julie. Were you happy with that, Tim, or did you want to say something else?
No, thanks for the response. Yeah. I mean, perhaps it would have been helpful if someone else could have put the apparent breach of the existing rules into context a bit and how we should regard that, but it didn't seem anyone could make a comment, so I won't pursue it.
I'm quite happy to feed back after the meeting, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, Julie. If there's no other points, I have got one that I know we discussed at the briefing very quickly, but I think it's important, and you came up with a very good response to it, but it could be something that's in members' minds as well. And that was at 3.2, where it says the first phase has focused on simplifying the process for groups applying for small amounts of funding, and has seen the introduction of a shorter electronic grant application form. It is hoped that there will be an increase in new and underrepresented groups applying. And if you remember, one of the things was we want new and underrepresented groups applying, and sort of it trips off from what Councillor Bickwood is saying, and we discussed at the briefing, and that was that we wouldn't, even though this is a simplified, and I have no problem with it either, but I wouldn't want to see underrepresented represented groups then sidelined because they didn't have the means to access these shorter grant application forms. It's how we get that story across to them and how we encompass those new groups. So it's basically bouncing off from what Councillor Bickwood already said.
Yes, and thanks for reminding me about that conversation. I had intended to cover that in my introduction. I think with the small grants application process, what we were really keen to do was engage with the infrastructure organisations that work with smaller groups right from the outset. So they helped us develop the small grant application process to try and make sure that we use terminology that was accessible to those small groups. I think there's a danger of us using terminology that we understand and potentially even the bigger groups understand, but perhaps not the smaller ones. So I'm really happy that we've got a set of documents and guidance notes that will be accessible. And then what we're also able to offer, and actually always have, is a service where Cambridge Council for Voluntary Service, Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum and ourselves as the grants team are quite happy to sit with a group, whether that be on a Teams call or in person or on the telephone, and actually help a group complete the application form online. And there's quite a lot of support that we can provide in terms of increasing digital skills. It's not only important in terms of being able to complete our grant application form, but for small groups to access funding from pretty much anywhere, they need to be able to do that digitally now. So there's mechanisms and processes in place to do that. And if it came to it, I'm sure we would accept an application in another format. And it's certainly, again, something I'm keen to look at as part of a second phase of the grants review. Actually, do we want to be a bit more radical, potentially even accept video applications, or even applications whereby we interview groups? You know, really what's important is the quality of the information, not necessarily how we get that information. So, you know, I think, you know, it is a pilot for a reason, and we'll take all the learning we can get from that, and any feedback that councillors or the infrastructure groups have for us at the end of that pilot.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. And if members are happy, recommendations on page 26 at 2.1, all those in favour of the recommendations, please?
Chair.
And any against? And abstentions? One abstention. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for that, Julie.
Thank you.
So that takes us to item 7 on page 31, and I see that Eleanor Dent, although this is a shared report, Eleanor is with us, so we'll leave it to Eleanor to introduce this item. Recommendations are on page 32 at 2.1. Eleanor, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation is to note the report. The report is the annual report produced by the shared service, where we cover the information governance arrangements. That mostly covers requests for information under FOI, EIR, data protection, and then there's also some cybersecurity arrangements under there as well. I just draw your attention to the fact that we had to issue an addendum to this. We found some errors in our original calculations, which have something to do with the reporting out of our system. So we've produced them some amended figures for that. They also work in our favour in terms of the compliance rate went up from previously reported 83 to 87%. The number of requests has remained broadly the same, and that's a pattern now we've seen over the last few years since COVID's been an issue. They dropped a bit when COVID came in, and they've maintained that level over the last few years. And then also, because of those calculation errors, we've had to reissue the compliance against each service. Headline figures are the same in that the majority of requests FOI come in under those 3 services of commercial services, environmental services, and the planning services.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to remind members, there is an extra sheet for agenda item 7. I saw it when I got here. I've not had a chance to look at it yet, but did everybody get that? Everybody happy? Right, okay, thank you for that. Yeah. Are there, I've got Naomi, Councillor Bennett waiting. Is there anybody else to add to my list? Rosie, okay. So Councillor Bennett, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair. Eleanor, I just wanted to ask you a question related to the cost of the complying for freedom of information requests. I know that, for example, the Shared Waste Services publishes almost a mini website on recycling because they get so many information requests. In your opinion, are there other areas where we should be preempting freedom of information requests by possibly doing a bit more publishing on the high frequency areas? And if so, could you talk us through them? Thank you.
Sure, no problem. We already do some work in terms of preemptively providing information for requests. So we get a lot of requests around business rates liabilities and outstanding debtors for business rates. So we publish that information on the internet, on a quarterly basis. The way that Freedom of Information requests work, however, is that you receive a request, and if the information's published somewhere else, we still have to tell the requester that the information is published somewhere else and help them find that, so usually by providing a link. So that still counts in our stats in terms of that's a request received, that's a request answered, because that's received, answered under an exemption in Freedom of Information. So they still count from the point of view of traffic, shall we say, of requests coming in. But yeah, we do a bit of work in terms of finding out those areas where we have preemptively, or where we get repeat requests. And we also would talk to things like to officers if they're doing consultations in particular, local consultations. There's lots of engagement with local consultations to make sure sufficient background information is put up there to preempt those questions coming in under FOI. So all the background documentation that you have to make a decision or to launch a consultation, if that information is included in the consultation, that helps to drive down some of those more reactive FOIs.
Thank you. That's very clear and very reassuring.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Moore, it's all yours.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the different questions, because obviously some are specific to the council and then some are more generic and might not be relevant, like how many beaches do you have, or how many school dinners does your council provide? And I just wonder whether there'd be a way of breaking down. I was just going to suggest 2, but maybe now there's 3. 1, not relevant to this council, because presumably that still counts, does it? And you have to respond. That could be one question. But could you separate them in future so we know how many are relevant, and then how many where the answer is available, and then how many are more specific?
I would just say for the reporting of this, we don't include requests that we receive that are for things like that we know are another organisation. So we do receive a number of FOI requests to our mailboxes about things like schools, about traffic wardens, that kind of thing, things that are dealt with by another authority within the area. Those are not included in these stats because they don't take any city council officer time up to respond to those. Those are dealt with at the point of receipt at the shared service. So those don't get included in these statistics.
So, Carly.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering on page 34, where it mentions the 2 areas that are still regarded as amber, i.e. the incident management and the monitoring, and it explains why monitoring is, and essentially that it may move to green later. I'm just wondering if you could let us know kind of why incident management is still regarded as amber, and if kind of there's any chance that we're going to be able to improve that in the near future. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just get that reference again? Just to make sure.
Yeah, sorry, so just on page 34, the paragraph just before section 7 starts, where it talks about incident management. I'm just wondering, it tells us that it's still regarded as amber, and it's kind of wondering if you can tell us why.
I'm going to refer you to my colleague Alex Young, who is the person who did the cybersecurity section. Okay.
Good evening. Hiya. So this is a report around our 10 steps and cybersecurity. So we do have a incident management process in place. We're in the process of testing it at the moment. So that once we've gone through that testing and we're happy with it, so we've done the initial testing. Once we've gone through that process and we're happy with it, we'll be moving that to green. The bit around the monitoring, we do monitoring. We have certain login systems in there. What we're in the process of doing is centralizing that into a single log, which will allow us to do some automatic check-in. Once that's in place, which we've got a scheduled date of that being completed at the end of October, that's when we would be in a position to turn around and believe that that setting is in green.
Everybody happy? Very good. Councillor Bick.
Yeah, obviously one of the reasons for looking at this is to see how we how we stack up against our targets. And I'm pleased to see that the update document actually improves the performance in turning round our responses to FOI requests from 83 to 87, and so obviously we're within striking distance of the statutory target. But it is a bit disappointing on a council, I think, that would pride itself on its openness, that we haven't made the 90% figure. And then looking at the list of how that breaks down into service areas, to comment on, but I mean, you probably would always come back to estates and facilities on that list on the basis that 40% is really low, and even the average response time was 29 days. So I just wondered what the situation was there in estates and facilities, whether it's the type of request they get or just that they didn't have the procedures properly in place, and what measures are being taken to improve that, because I would hazard a guess that improving that would get us to the 90%.
Yeah, we've been working with the estates and facilities. So the way we operate is that every head of service will get a reminder email of all the requests that are open in their service that are coming up to response dates. That happens on a weekly basis from our team to all heads of service. We will flag and we will escalate. We have been working with estates and facilities in terms of giving them additional support, providing additional training, and working with them to identify staff that they can dedicate that FOI resource to within their service. So we're hoping that will improve. But yeah, so they are specifically being supported on that and has been raised with them.
You saved me asking that question, Councillor, because I also brought that up at the briefing as well. Thank you for that. So that means I can say even less. That's always a good thing. Thank you for that, Eleanor. So I think we can duly say your report has been noted, and thank you for all the work on it. And it's not an easy area to please people, is it? It really isn't. So thank you very much for that. That takes us... Did I miss something? Oh, sorry, I thought somebody mentioned it. That takes us to item 8 on page 47. And the recommendations are on page 47 at 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 over the page. So, Deborah, if I can pass over to you, that would be lovely. Thank you.
The report that you have in front of you is the 3-yearly update on our pensions discretions statement for consideration and adoption by Council. The pensions discretions statement is in effect our employer pension decision-making guidance. We've adopted these in line with the Pensions Authority mandated template. So Appendix A is a document that we are required to fill in and consider in a number of categories. And my colleague Mike Scott and I have been through that in great detail, looking at our current discretions, looking at the new template, and taking advice where needed from the Pensions Authority. We have adopted our discretions in line with our previous policy, and where we've made changes, they're not material. We've taken advice about wording. The only area where we're proposing to make a material change is in relation to the discretion on shared cost AVCs. Since 2019, when we last reviewed the policy, there's an option that's become available for staff as a staff benefit, and that is a salary sacrifice scheme, a shared cost AVC. So the AVCs are an independent financial arrangement, but taken at the time when somebody retires, leaves the pension scheme. It has tax and NI benefits for staff and savings potentially for us. The scheme that's in use is used by over 150 local authorities and is gaining in popularity. It's an approved and compliant scheme, and the details are set out in the report. But at looking into the procurement arrangements, we haven't had time to finalise that before you're considering the pension statement that's in front of you. So there is a proposal in the recommendations to consider that outside of the meeting by consulting with various parties. I'd like to be in a position to offer this benefits to staff subject to the procurement considerations and the committee and council's agreement to change the shared cost ABC discretion, which is set out on page 57. And Mike and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have, hopefully not of great detail.
Councillor Bick, the floor is yours.
Yeah, not a question in great detail, just to say that I'm familiar with the concept here of the salary sacrifice contribution. I wasn't aware that it had only become possible in 2019, but I think I find that many employers have been practicing it for a lot longer than that. But it seems to me that if this is a form of value we can add to our staff, then we don't see a reason why we wouldn't do it. I mean, it's probably a relatively minor issue in the big picture in what kind of enables us to attract and retain staff, but if there's something that, 100 and something other councils are already offering their staff and we aren't, then, you know, it might be a bit of a negative impact if people discover they can't continue something they already had started somewhere else. But I think it is something to me that we should say yes to.
Answer to that is thank you.
Councillor Bennett, in that case, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to comment, I approve of the paper, but I just wanted to add a warning note in my day job. We found that compliance issues with wording and practice of salary sacrifices has often been quite problematic, and I just wanted to check that any wording and practical advice has actually been checked out by an independent tax accountant in view of the high frequency of problems attached. Thank you.
The shared cost ABC is something that was actually introduced post 2019. It came about because one particular local authority looked into the possibility of adding salary sacrifice to the pension scheme. The regulations around LGPS governance didn't allow that, but they did then look into the ABCs, and they sought HMRC compliance with regard to this. So it has been fully vetted and is completely HMRC compliant.
Are you okay with that, Councillor Bennett?
I am, Chair, thank you.
Okay, just because you're not here, I wanted to check you heard that response and you were happy. In that case, Councillor Thornborough.
I don't know, would it have been appropriate for the unions to be consulted on this? And if so, have they been? Thanks.
They have, and they're supportive of the proposals.
No more comments? Okay, members, in that case then, recommendations on page 47 at 2.1 to, I believe, 2.4, if my memory serves me, no, 2.3. All those in favour of those recommendations?
It's all 5 in the room, Chair.
That's unanimous, thank you so much. We'll take us directly on to item 9, and Deborah is still centre stage. Recommendations for this are on page 69, 2.1, and that goes to 2.4.
This report is about the potential to increase our minimum hourly pay from the current £10 an hour to £11 an hour with effect from the 1st of April 2023. The report sets out our approach to a minimum pay level, which is a combination of salary point, the real living wage, and the Cambridge weighting, which is the final part, which is the top up to currently £10 an hour. And in the report, it sets out how we do that and the need for a delegation to make the adjustments as any one of those three factors could change. Timing for me is slightly unfortunate because the announcement of the real living wage is tomorrow, 22nd of September, but I would hazard a guess that it is going to increase above £9.90 and will cross the threshold of £10 an hour. And obviously our minimum rate is £10 an hour. The other thing to note, which is set out in the report, is our current state of national pay negotiations. So there is an offer on the table. Excuse me, it's currently being consulted on by the trade unions. It's unlikely that we'll have a settlement of that before December, but it will be backdated to the 1st of April once it's agreed. And again, that will take our minimum pay point up to around £10.60 an hour. So again, it's a reason to look at our minimum rate of £10 an hour. So in line with those proposals, along with those situations, the proposal is that we increase to £11 an hour with effect from the 1st of April 2023. So three things will happen. The real living wage tomorrow, which will be an increase, pay award backdated, and then the 1st of April increase in the minimum rate of the Cambridge weighting. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councillor Moore, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bick.
Thank you, Deborah, for your report. I just wanted to clarify how this fits with our shared services. I assume that this covers all of our employees or people that work for us, but I'd just like clarity on that. And also, if anything changes, for example, the cost of living, as we all know, is going up and up and up, what are the opportunities for increasing this further later in the year, should we need to? Thank you.
In relation to shared services, the posts that are covered here are mace bearers and venue assistants at the Corn Exchange. So they're not posts which are covered by the shared service. And it's generally below the levels of posts that we're in shared service with, say, planning and shared waste. In relation to an opportunity to increase it again, normally this would come through in the pay policy statement, which you consider at Civic fairs in late January, February, and then goes to council. So I will refer to it again, and there will be an opportunity this year in that cycle, and then any future year in the cycle, or to come again out of cycle, should members decide that that's appropriate.
Councillor Bick.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of the direction here. I was just curious to understand how the figure of £11 had been arrived at, because the report is sort of silent on that point. Probably fair enough. I mean, we all understand the environment that this is proposed in, but I just wondered if we could have a few words about why how £10 has risen to 11 and why that we think is the right number.
I think it would be fair to say no great science about that, but it was proposed as a reasonable increase, and a round number helps us in that respect. So I will not be able to lay out evidence for why £11, but we tend to pick a number which is a round pound number.
If I could just come back and ask what this doesn't give us. I mean, it provides all of the information in one sense, because it tells us that those particular job titles you mentioned are covered. There aren't many of them, and it provides a cost which demonstrates it's quite a low cost. But what we don't have here is any sense of what the distribution of hourly rates is and the concentration of hourly rates is above that figure of £11. And it probably doesn't impact a decision that we're expected to take now, but it would be perhaps quite interesting to understand whether we had sort of 20% of our staff sitting at just above £11, or whether it was much more spread out than that.
Part of that answer, our pay distribution is very much a bell curve. Band 1 is the bottom of our pay grade. The number of people that are on Band 1 has increased. That's the group covered by the Cambridge Weighting and the Real Living Wage. Has increased recently with the change in policy for taking on staff directly employed by us in the Corn Exchange. Band 2, which is the next band, which goes from £10.81 to £11.93, has a number of points within it, and again, that's a grade that has similar sorts of numbers of staff. The majority of our staff are in the bands 3, 4, 5 and 6, and you're looking at salaries that are starting around £23,500. But I take your point, thank you.
Have the unions been consulted on this, and what have they said? Thanks.
Yes, supportive.
Thank you. I was just kind of wondering if there's any feasible way we could get this to take effect more quickly, given how much the cost of living crisis has made people struggle in the last few months, and with inflation being as high as it is now. Or are they sort of procedural governance reasons that it has to take place in April?
Are you referring to the National Pay Award?
The increase that we're proposing here, I mean.
The proposal is that it increases in April in line with the fact that we've got the Real Living Wage tomorrow, which will be an increase which will take it above £10, and that will come into effect from a date and be paid in October. The pay award will be backdated to the 1st of April 2022 and is likely to take the pay rate to £10.60. So the proposal is that there's a further increase in the 1st of April. So it's really about affordability, timing, and continuing to have something which is on offer. So it was considered, but the report is proposing 1st of April 2023, and in line with the question that Councillor Thornborough has just asked, and the unions were supportive of that.
Okay, thank you for that, everyone. In that case, recommendations on page 69 and 70, we have 2 recommendations and 2 notes, 2.3 and 2.4. Is everybody happy to take them as one, or would you like to do it? Happy to do it en bloc. That's fine. All those in favour?
All 5 members in the room, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Deborah, I'd just like to thank you for all the work on both of those reports. I thought I'd wait till you've done the second one. So thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. I know a lot of work goes into these things, and we mustn't forget to thank all the officers that spend so much time doing this. And also thank you for the supplementary here, because that was my fault, because when we had the briefing, I said I may be getting too old and crotchety, I don't know, but I found it extraordinarily difficult to read. It was very small. So thank you for producing something slightly bigger. I guess I deserved that. But thank you very much for the work on that. And I'm going to, it was actually so useful, I'm actually going to keep that. So thank you, the work was worth it. Thank you. That takes us to item 10 on page 75, I'm sorry. Recommendations are on page 75 and 76. And Caroline will present this report. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. So this report follows on from a report that went to Strategy and Resources in July. in which the Executive Councillor for Finance and Resources agreed to implement recommendations within the, which came from a review of our budget setting process. The areas that this paper addresses are the formal approval process for the General Fund budget setting report and environments and carry forwards for the whole of the council. So this report sets out proposed changes to the Constitution to bring those changes into effect. It also notes that these were developed through working meetings, party working group meetings that have informed the proposals in this report. I think that summarises roughly what we're asking here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members on this? Civic.
First of all, I'd like to confirm that and welcome the fact that there was some cross-party discussion about this subject, and that I think has led to a situation where the what's in front of us has enlarged the area of agreement across the parties. I think there are many things that probably logical about what we will get to procedurally, but one of them that I pick out is that it does seem much more sensible that we do our public consultation about the budget when there's something on the table that people can actually comment upon, rather than to have some sort of rather more kind of open-ended, make of it what you will process with nothing on the table in before that. So I think that is definitely a piece of positive progress. The other procedural issue that isn't here is in relation to aligning the HRA budget process, which was also recommended in the same review. I personally don't think that can come fast enough. I understand there are some practical issues that need to be resolved, but I do think we should sort of flag to ourselves that there is a possibility, and I would argue a need for that to happen in the future. I think it's also healthy that that we've got we move to some rules in terms of transferring money between places across the council, that is updated and made more flexible, and I think it's sensible financial housekeeping to do what is proposed in almost all respects. But I think it has to be, so long as it's subject to commensurate transparency and scrutiny, which I think, again, is satisfied in almost all respects. There are two aspects of the recommendations which I still have reservations about. The first is referred to in the recommendations, and that is recommendation 3 specifically, where it talks about the meetings. And in fact, it does accept that having a full council meeting that is adjourned and continued a little while later on a different date isn't entirely satisfactory. And I think it isn't, but I don't really understand why we're not correcting that point now. And the reason why it's unsatisfactory is that the effect of deciding ahead of time that you're going to do some business on one day and then some business on another day, not just the overflow, but you've decided ahead what's going to happen on which date, is that all of the deadlines that relate to business in the second half are ludicrously early for that second date. And things may happen, the public wants to ask questions, things like motions and amendments to motions, amendments to recommendations, all of which, if we wanted to have lead times and deadlines so far ahead, then we should have them, but we haven't really decided that that's necessary. So why we shouldn't regard these as two separate council meetings to do exactly what's described here, I don't really get, and it just seemed to me unfinished business. And the second point is that I think the varmint table that is proposed is okay until it gets to the third level, which is where money can be proposed to be transferred between totally different policy areas within the council. And that's something that if you were considering moving money in the actual annual budget process as much as 250,000, that would be quite a big issue between one policy area and another. Certainly not always wrong, but something that needs discussing and scrutinising, understanding. And I think that the effect of allowing 250,000 to be transferred to totally different policy areas within the say-so of the Executive Councillor, which really doesn't mean anything happens in the public domain at all, it is wrong. And I think that if the full council is the right way of approving that, then the threshold should be much lower for it to be a decision of the full council. Something like 100,000 is still a lot of money, and could make a decent sort of watershed between what an executive councillor can do and what the full council has to do. So those are a couple of reservations that I have in what is overall a good set of recommendations.
Thank you. If I can answer some of those. First of all, the alignment of the General Fund and HRA budget setting processes are certainly something that we need to address, but I am conscious that there is a fair amount of complexity in that, and it was felt that there was not enough time before the budget setting process kicked off this year to do a proper that, and it will, I think, give rise to some quite significant changes in the Constitution. So that has been, I suppose, penciled in for next year, so that we could be looking at those changes for the 24-25 budget setting process. Also, I think, refer to the third recommendation, and I know what you say about the adjournment of council. I think the third recommendation does note that this is not maybe ideal, and will be looked at there again when the next municipal year is scheduled. So there is a note there that is understood to be an issue and will be reviewed. If I can go to the question on environments, the recommendations that are in front of you at all levels have been benchmarked against a number of other councils of similar size with similar sort of responsibilities, and is within the limits and are similar to others. I think the highest limit we saw for this type of transfer was $500,000. So it is considerably below that. I think, report that Councillor Davey was happy with the £250,000 limit here. I think it's noting that although decisions will be made by the two executive councillors if it's moving between portfolios, there are opportunities for scrutiny either as at resources if the timing allows, or using the sort of urgent decision type process. So it's not that there will be not be any scrutiny, but it won't be full council scrutiny. I've addressed that. Thank you.
I think you have. I have Councillor Bennett and Councillor Thornborough. So, Councillor Bennett, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on 2 points. I welcome the extra caution taken with the alignment of the HRA and the general fund. Could I just ask, am I echoing for you? Because I'm hearing myself twice.
No, it's all steady here, no problem.
Okay, I'll just ignore the echo and carry on, because this is a particularly difficult year for HRA with the high inflation rate, the cap on increases, and so much noise in the system. HRA accountants have a lot more work than usual, and the challenge of harmonising the 2 budgets shouldn't be understated. So I welcome taking the additional time and the caution. My second issue is with environment limits. And here I just want to be explicit that I support all the limits, including the £250,000 limit, although I have made a suggestion that there would be a review a year in to see how it's all working. And I feel that we are leaving a period behind where council life was a lot more predictable to one where it's highly unpredictable. And we need the flexibility of these new rules to ensure that we meet our objectives as a council. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Thornborough.
It's a small point. On item 3 that we're asked to consider, we have to agree the first point, and then we have to also note an arrangement. So wouldn't it be appropriate if the to note bit was a separate point rather than combining it into one point, so that we can, so that to note is a separate point that we have to actually take on board, even though we've already agreed that this year there'll be 2 separate meetings. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I can see exactly what you mean. It is 2 items really, that, isn't it? Yeah, I'm happy to do that. No problem. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Apologies for that. Yes, I didn't notice that creeping in there.
No, that's fine. That was just something I was going to mention myself, but I've actually got it underlined here, but that makes perfect sense if everybody's happy with that. Are there any other questions?
Can I just say, our independent person has made a suggestion. Environment levels are reviewed after a suitable period of time to ensure they're protected, and I would certainly agree with that suggestion, and I think it can go alongside the review which we're carrying out at the end of the year on
Okay, in that case, members, that would make the recommendations into 5 points. So that would be 1 and 2 and 3 as stand. And then where the sentence starts under under recommendation 3, to note this arrangement, if we make that number 4, and the current 4 would then be 5. Everybody happy with that? That seems to make sense to me. And further to that, are we happy to vote on block, or would you like to go one at a time? Okay, I thought you might be. Okay, so in that case, then we'll go to the vote and we'll take it between numbers 1 and 5. So all those in favour of part 1, please show.
All in the room, Chair.
All those in favour of part 2? Thank you. And in favour of part 3?
Four, Chair.
And those against? And abstention? Okay, thank you. So that takes us to the new part 4. So just so that we're all clear, that will start off to note that this arrangement. So that will be part 4. All those in favour?
Yep, all in the room, Chair.
Thank you very much. And that takes us to the final part 5, to agree the changes. All those in favour?
Chair.
And against? And abstentions, please. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we made sense of that. Thank you for your work on that, Caroline. Okay, thanks, everyone. That takes us to the last item on page 87, which is the committee and council calendar. Did you want to say anything on that, Andrew, as you were actually here? You spent so long with us.
Thank you, Chair. I hope it's fairly self-explanatory, standard item this time of year. Gary's report makes clear it's an indicative kind of, obviously that could be subject to further change, but hopefully it's helpful to get in everybody's diaries, at least as a draft at this stage.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just thought it would be such a shame if you didn't get a chance to speak. I've got one question, but others first, please. Any questions on it? Sam?
Would you just mind quickly running us through what changes there's been, if any? I noticed housing seems to have moved, because that's on a Thursday at the moment, I think. Just for that would be useful.
Really, Chair, I'm not aware of any changes. I wasn't briefed on there being any changes, so sorry.
I should have said that the calendar is on page 89. I'm sorry, that was my omission.
As far as I was aware, it was following the pattern of previous years, but if there's been some minor changes, I'll ask Gary to follow up when he's back from leave next week.
Councillor Bennett.
Oh, just a very tiny point. I noticed at the bottom you've got a space to put in the Labour and the Lib Dem party conferences. Just a reminder that you also need to allow for the Green Party conferences as well. We have 6 a year.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I'll mention that to Gary, and I'm sure he'll be in touch with you to find out what those dates are. I can't promise that we'll be able to avoid all meetings on all 6 of those dates, but we'll certainly want to take them into account. Thank you.
Any other questions? I've only got one observation, really. It appears, amazingly, that I'll be redundant as chair until May next year. I find that, so there'll be no civic affairs meetings from today until May next year, which I found a little bit extraordinary. So have we missed something? We'll always come back to it if nobody knows now. Caroline.
I think it's worth just saying, Chair, that I believe we will need another civic affairs meeting shortly to deal with the statement of accounts.
Having shared this before the mayoralty days, that must be the longest gap I've ever seen for civic affairs. I thought perhaps if it's something I said, I ought to chair more meetings. Councillor Thurman.
Isn't there's a meeting on 8th of February? On the website, the diary.
Would make much more sense, to be fair, but I was just looking at the printed calendar that was in front of me on page 89, that was all.
I think, Chair, the calendar starts from May 2023.
This is for next municipal year.
So it is, that's why it says 23.
You're keeping us on our toes, aren't you?
I need to get out more, don't Okay, thank you for that. I'll just be quiet now. Okay, everybody, I think we are done. Thank you very much. I'll try to learn to read the calendar before I turn up next time. That may well be helpful, but if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. Thank you, everybody. We'll meet again soon, before next May.